I'll be talking again. I can't wait for an opportunity to get back in the swing of things. I'm in the studio today with my main man, the Rob Father. This man got on a fit today, y'all.
A what?
A fit. That's.
Oh, hey.
He got a nice hookup on today.
I never know who I'm going to meet, so I got to be fly for the guests.
So we are here today, and we're excited. I got a full show planned to you. We're going to talk about something that I think is very dangerous that we're dealing with, that we need to address, and that we need to stay up on top of right now. And that is the fact that we are in a position that we are seeing our voting rights put in danger as never before. So we got to make sure that we do what's necessary, what's right, in order to make sure that we are continually on the forefront of what's happening out there, and we're keeping our minds focused. But as we often do, and I want to make sure that we give ourselves enough time, Rob, to talk about what's going on today. But as we often do, talk about what's on my mind. There's really one thing that I want to talk about today, and it is a situation that we see taking place, or we have seen taking place, because they move with swift action in Del Rio, Texas. I mentioned it on last week. Since we were together on last week, we have seen some really swift and definitive movements take place, to no surprise to myself. But we've seen this take place, and now we are currently, as of today, all of the migrants, all of them have been displaced or been removed from the United States side of Del Rio. Absolutely. They were showing us how thousands of them, the single men, and y'all gotta have this conversation with me, because this is something that has been really just kind of bothering me the more I think about it. And this is the single men that were there were thought to be a nuisance, and they were afraid that they may rise up and create issues, and so they threw all them jokers on planes, and they repatriated them to Haiti. Now, they're Haitian by way of South America. For most of them, many of them have not been in Haiti since the earthquake of 2010. So they're being sent back to a country that has just had another major earthquake, Rob, where resources and employment and things that you would need to raise, they're not there. And so now they're being sent back to Haiti, because they said Haiti had enough to cover these men. Basically, they got enough land, and so they just said, we're not going to deal with them here on our border, so take them back. So they put them on a plane, and they shipped them back to Haiti. I think there were about 8,000 single men that they took, and then the other remaining 9,000 individuals, supposedly, they have moved them to different locations for the process of starting on this idea of becoming U.S. citizens, some form of citizenship, Rob. I just want to, I got to chew on that real quick for a second, because what I saw in terms of the optics, the imagery, was very, what's the term I'm looking for, Rob?
Disturbing.
It was disturbing, but it was reminiscent. It was something that took me back to places in time in American history before. And we saw these men that were Border Patrol horsemen. They've been trained to use their horses as tactics. I've never seen them before. I guess since we're not border state people, many of us have never seen them before.
Right.
But seeing these men on these 7-8 foot Clydesdales bouncing around, using the horses as deterrents for men to come into the community. They're already in the United States, but to come out of the water and pushing them back into the water and using the reins of the horses as whips was a very disturbing image to me. And for me, my personal thought was, where are the dogs and the water hose? If we're going to do this, let's do this right. If we're going to go back, let's go all the way back, right? So it was very difficult to watch. It was very disturbing. Our vice president and president and alike have all said that these things will be dealt with, and that they will be given the full weight of the law, and those individuals who are responsible will be held accountable. I'm not sure what that means, because I know that at the end of the day, it's going to come down to a set of laws. And what the Texas governor did was he looked at the laws. He says, what can I be found guilty of and what can I get away with, and we'll squeeze between the lines. And he sent, this was crazy because when he saw them coming, he took the law in his own hands. And he said, I'm the governor of the state. I'm responsible for protecting my state. And so he sent citizens down to form an armor gate. They literally parked their cars and created a barrier between the individuals. And I saw like people trying to move. They were not allowing them to get through the barrier, which, I believe that we have to have safe borders. I believe in border patrol. I believe in border safety. I believe in all of those things for people alike. But the crazy thing about it is, and the thing that really causes me some stress about this, Rob, is that these individuals in Haiti, my grandfather actually was almost let off in Guam. So he almost ended up living in Guam after the war. But I look at how they were just on a different boat that got off a little earlier than the ones that came here to areas like, Maryland and Louisiana and those other places. So there's not much different. It made me appreciate my the freedoms that I have, but it also made me take into account there's not much different from these Haitian immigrants and our forefathers that were here, that were put on a ship. They just ended up in Haiti, unfortunately, and we ended up here. And so I think that we have to now begin to look at what are we doing as a nation, and how are we seen as people, right? That's the biggest thing. And what I saw was there's not much progress when it comes to the faces of Black folks, because there have been Mexicans at these borders for how long? For centuries, right? But they made sure that they cleaned up that particular situation with the individuals at the border. Now, I believe in safe borders. I believe that there should be pathways of citizenship. I believe that we should follow our laws. But I also think that people are here because they came for refugee status. Everyone that was coming here was not coming for religious persecution or the fact that they were exiles from the government. Some people wanted a better way of living. As a matter of fact, the symbol of freedom and opportunity that our nation looks at is the Statue of Liberty. And when we look in New York, we see what is taking place out there, and we see the diversity that takes place. These are people from all over the world. And I think that we need to really begin to think as a community, as people, as Black folk. I'm not going to say people of color, as African descendants of slave. Really, how far have we really come? And today's conversation is really probably a great indication that we haven't come as far as we think that we actually have, Rob.
Well, it's easy for people who are guilty of these things and who advocate this sort of thing to forget that they themselves and their ancestors were actual immigrants. The only people that were indigenous people are the Native Americans. Then we as Black people were brought over here, and then everyone else were, immigrants themselves. Every last one of them.
And it's an interesting situation that they're saying that, TikTok, the game is locked, let's stop these borders. When every single individual that was out there, including the governor himself, has some roots to some other country because they are not, as you said, indigenous people. So that was my thing. That was my soapbox that I've been on. I don't think I did not like the way that it looked. I did not like the way that we responded. And so I'm hoping that things will come forward with that situation. Now, the other thing that I think is worth mentioning as well is the fact that we are now at a place in time that we've been looking at everything that these insurrectionists, Rob. This is going to be much ado about nothing. We still have these insurrectionists that are being prosecuted. Some of them have pled guilty, felonies. This is becoming a retelling of the story. This is becoming exactly what we've seen in a lot of these other things that we talked about on the show, how they have rebranded and retold the story. So now they're patriots that will be probably one day in history thought of as doing something and standing up for democracy in ways that more people should have been bold enough to do. But I'm not buying that ticket. I'm not buying it, so don't even try to sell it to me.
Patriots, the people who did the insurrection?
Yes, the what do you call them? The anarchists.
I'll call them terrorists.
The treasonous, the terrorists. That's exactly what they were.
I'm a patriot. I'm a patriot. You're a patriot. We didn't decide to, just because we don't like some of these things in our government, we didn't decide to, attack Lansing, state capital there, or go into D.C. to do anything. We vote. we write our congressman and we complain in that aspect. We talk on radio about things that bother us. We don't take action to what happened on January 6th.
And I'm glad you said that. So those of you who are out there listening, and you know, the reason I was banned, I'll get back to that, was because someone decided that they didn't like what it was that I was saying. So the radio has not banned me, but Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg has me banned for 30 days. And so I have about 2 more weeks in Facebook jail before I emerge. And when I emerge, I'm going to shout from the rooftops. I will not be silenced. I'm going to continue to stand.
Hold on for a minute.
Yes. I'm going to stand and keep those statements.
This is you.
This is me right here.
Yeah.
What is this, Rob?
Hold on.
Rob is now giving me a jailbreak theme song, y'all.
That's right, baby. That's right.
All right, so well, let's call it what it really is. Trump supporters. You know what it is. Those of you who are listening, you know what it is. You know how it do. But it is what it is. We're going to move forward with that. We're excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. I think it's important for me also to let you know we're scheduling that time for the city manager and the mayor to come in. So we can continue that conversation. I have now given them 3 dates to choose from that they are able to come in, and so I'm just waiting for them to respond. They did a great job of responding to my initial inquiry, and so I'm excited about them coming. We're going to have them here because I know that they've been over to WSUW, and you know, that misses a whole population of people, and that's one of the reasons. One of the things that we saw when we were in the meeting a couple Fridays ago, Rob, was that one side of the river, there were 1,000, I don't know, there's 1,000, I guess, people that responded to the survey. But the majority of those numbers came from the west side of the city. And my thought is probably because the radio station and the engagement as it relates from the city's perspective was done, one, I think pretty much solely on social media. And then number 2, the radio show that they're listening to on WSUW with Art Lewis is not a station typically that folks from the hood would really listen to. So I said, why don't you come over and have a conversation with us over here on Straight Talk, where we talk to the people in the community. We're talking is, you know, food for us, by us. We're having these conversations that impact, and I'm definitely going to make sure that we ask the tough questions and that we get to the bottom of this. I want to thank our Mayor Brenda Moore for being very integral and making sure that happened. But Tim, I didn't have to drag scream. I said, hey, listen, I need you to come over. This is what we need to do. And he did so without hesitation. So I want to say thank you to him, and I look forward to that conversation as we move forward.
I need to point out that our sister station is WSUW AM and FM, where you can listen to your other talk show, United Shades of Gray, at 7 o'clock right after this show.
Yeah, you can listen to the reason that got me banned from social media, United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. And on that station, we were going through a book by a white sister by the name of Robin DiAngelo. There's a foreword by Pastor Michael Eric Dyson, and it's a prolific, a very profound book. It's about how our system of governance, our systems that we work with, are all latent in white supremacy, and how we must begin to deal with those issues, and how white America must stand up and figure out what they're going to do to change that particular situation. I'm merely just a messenger, and instead, you know how it always happens, the messenger gets shot.
Yeah. So again, we're covering the book White Fragility.
Written
by a white woman named Robin
DiAngelo. That's correct.
We're dissecting the book. I think we're in section 4 now.
Yeah. So tune in this coming next Sunday. Yeah, tonight you'll get be able to kind of hear some of the dynamic of what we're talking about on next week's show. We record it live on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. and then we play what we record. So you can call in, you can leave your comments on that show. Just tune in 1 p.m. On Wednesdays, and that's usually on my United Shades of Gray or on WSUW live, because once again I am banned. I'll remind everyone of my banning. But yeah, so that is a great opportunity for you to get involved and understand what it is that we're talking about. But so many things are going on. All of you that are out there, let's get involved. Let's get tuned in. Let's begin to make change in the areas that we are empowered to make change. And what that means is that if you are a grassroots person, let's begin to coalesce around those grassroots individuals. Let's begin to build networks that we can begin to reach out and make some of the things known that we've got to begin to deal with. And this is 2021, but we know 2022 is that interim election cycle. And we should not have to sit here and wait till the last minute to begin to mobilize. I think that you start that process right away. And it's going to be very important. Today, as I said, our conversation is going to be the voting rights danger, what's taking place, and this is very dangerous. And so I have put together for us today a timeline of issues relating to our voting rights and how they have been instituted. And since we have gotten these rights, and which is crazy, since we have been given the rights by the larger part of our white supremacist station, our white supremacist nation in the system. And when I say that, we talk about white supremacy is because blacks were not considered to be human in the course of that time. It's not like whether white power, black power, that's not what we're doing. But anything that was created at that time was done so with the understanding that white is right. They controlled the legislation, they controlled the presidency, they controlled everything that took place. And so we're going to take a quick break in a minute. So that's why we use the term white supremacy. It's not that we're trying to create anything that does not already exist. So we're going to continue in this conversation, but we're going to take a quick 2-minute break, and we're going to be back, and we're going to get into the crux of the matter. Voting rights are in danger. Y'all better listen up, because things is about to change around here.
Straight Talk with Kareem Bowen on KISS 107.1.
Do you run out of hot water at home? It's a great time.
Talk about that impromptu thing, but I want to encourage you,
I feel like busted loose. Busted loose.
It's actually 2 minutes and 15. Looks like. Yeah. 1, 2, oh no, it's 2 minutes. I did right. It's kind of right.
Yeah.
Welcome to a place where everyone deserves to be better protected.
Kareem?
Yes, sir.
Did you mean to say white supremacy? Is that white fragility?
I said white supremacy, but you were right. You said it. Thanks for correcting me on that.
Because there's an even comment on white supremacy on here. We don't want them to do that.
What does that say?
Edward Singleton, there's something they're going to try and put in the history books, which we all know their white supremacy ways. See, that should be white fragility.
No. He's talking about my statement about the insurrectionists.
Oh, okay. You know, to listen to the station too.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get the wrong idea. Not that we're free, not that you can't keep it real, but I think even Robin DiAngelo known as called right there.
Yeah.
I read some more of her book the other day.
Listen to this station anytime.
30 seconds.
On Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Odyssey. That's AUDACY.
14.
Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Have you gotten your COVID vaccine yet? Find yours at michigan.gov/COVID vaccine or text your zip code to 438-829.
This is the guy, Kareem Bowen. We are back, and we're going to get into this conversation today about voting rights being in danger. Someone's saying, why are we talking about voting rights? It's not election time. It's because we need to realize that there are a number of things that are happening right now, began immediately after this last election, the day of. As soon as the election was considered over, these voting rights scandals and these things that began to take place, and they have not stopped. They have been relentless. They are coming forward, and we need to make sure that we understand what's taking place, because these things are going to impact us. If we wait until 2022 to do something about it, when we get to the polls, we're going to realize that we're not able to vote because there have been a number of things that have been led by the Republican legislature that are negatively impacting not only your right to vote, but access to voting, how you can vote, where you can vote, what qualifies you. These are all things that are a part of the voter suppression process. So I wanted to make sure that we took some time and we had a conversation with those of you who are out there, my brothers, my sisters who are out there today listening. If you're listening, please lean into this conversation. Don't turn the dial saying you don't want to hear no talking, you don't want to hear about voting. This is so important that we've got to lend an ear and we've got to lean into this conversation. All right, so we're going to get started. We all understand that this entire process started with what we would consider the Reconstruction era. Rob, our voting rights were a part of one of those three amendments that were passed during the Reconstruction era of our country. This is when our country had come to, some of us had come to an understanding that slavery should be abolished. Yes, Rob, what were you going to say?
Reconstruction right after the Civil War.
After the Civil War. And so there was a plan to really change some of the things. We understood that the Civil War was really about, you know, you and I as Black folks, should we be free or should we not?
Right.
There was a whole nation that was split on saying that this is immorally wrong for us to enslave Blacks. And they did not want to. Why? Because there was a benefit. There was a legacy that was being built on the foundation of our forefathers, the tobacco industry, the sugarcane industry, the entire economic system that existed in the United States from the time of colonization was all built on the fact that they had free labor.
Right.
And so that free labor generated through years what we would call generational wealth. And from that period of time, you know, you start get a 400-year head start on wealth. I think that there may be a great disparity. And one of the greatest problems that we have in our nation today is not racism and those other things. It is the issue of generational wealth. But we must deal with the systemic issues of racism that exist in our nation before we can even begin to have the conversation about generational wealth gap. But we want to begin. This all started when at the end of the Civil War, or right before the ending of the Civil War, with this whole idea or concept that we see taking place between 1863 and 1877, and we refer to this as Reconstruction. All right, we saw tremendous gains for Black people. Perspective, and if you keep it in perspective, we saw tremendous gains, including the ratification of 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Rob, this is a quick history lesson. What were the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments? What have you learned since you have been here with Kareem on Straight Talk?
Give me what I learned before you were born.
Okay, there you go. However you learned it, just give it to me.
I don't have them straight in my mind, but one was we should not enslave Blacks. No one should be enslaved for servitude.
That's the 13th.
Right to vote, or to
that's the 15th,
and I forget the other one.
Right, the 14th was that for those who are indigenous, and this was really extended beyond Black people,
right,
to folks who were here, such as the indigenous people. There was a pathway to citizenship that was created. So the 13th Amendment was an abolition of slavery. The 14th Amendment made us, give us a pathway to citizenship so that we could then execute what was then the 15th Amendment.
Which also allowed us to be recognized as humans and not be fifth humans.
Absolutely. So we gained our humanity, even though we have been on the planet, even though we have been on the planet since the very let there be, and we were here since Adam existed. We now have been given our right to be a full whole human and no longer 3/5 human. Thank you for that privilege of the 14th Amendment. I certainly appreciate it. Now we can be recognized as citizens. So I guess as citizens, we should be able to, or as humans, we should be able to have a pathway to citizenship. And then also eventually the 15th Amendment giving us the right to vote, that no state could stop its citizens from voting.
However, there's loopholes in the 15th Amendment, which is why we're
going to talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't want to go too far. Let's start right there. So from the period of 1863 to 1877, we saw this massive movement of things happening. Black people are saying, hey, we're tired of this. We need to do something different. So December of 1863, this whole concept of Reconstruction truly began. According to Columbia University, there's a professor by the name of Eric Foner. He said that the Reconstruction era began more than a year before the end of the civil rights. When Abraham Lincoln, and we understand the end of the Civil War. The end of the Civil War, right? Civil War, excuse me. This is where Abraham Lincoln comes in, and we understood about the Emancipation Proclamation and what that meant. But this is where they begin to establish and announce a plan to establish governments in the South that were loyal to the Union. These governments backed legislation guaranteeing that Black Americans' rights were vehemently opposed by the counter-revolutionary redemption movement that began to sweep the South. So basically, the North was saying, hey, let's give Blacks some rights. The South was saying, we ain't giving them no rights. We're going to keep them to work. And when they saw that happen, that the North began to input some of them into the fighting regimen and that they were winning, the South said, hey, we'll let you vote if you fight for us. So there were some people that were fighting for the South because they were given this whole idea that they would be able to, get that right to vote. So this has been something that has been going on for a very, very, very long time. And so as we continue to look at this, we go from that period of time to April 9th, 1865. This is when the Civil War effectively comes to an end, Rob, at the Battle of Appomattox. There you go, Appomattox. There we go. The Battle of Appomattox courthouse. Were you born back then, Rob?
No, I just love Civil War history.
Civil War in Virginia, the Confederate Army, Robert E. Lee surrenders. That statue that was just removed of who number 45 said was a hero and that he should have been one that should probably put in a strategy for Afghanistan.
Well, we can argue with that because he was General Robert E. Lee was a hero to the Confederacy.
Absolutely.
But Ulysses Grant respected him, which is,
I mean, he respected him. I mean, you always respect your enemy. And I think that's important. But the fact of the matter is that he surrendered.
Right.
And so he effectively lost the war.
Right.
History lesson number 45.
For the South.
For the South, absolutely. But we saw his statue being removed just a couple weeks ago.
Right.
This is why, because these pieces of history that some people look at nostalgic when they want to make America great again, take us back to those times when we had statues of individuals like that put up when they were fighting against our freedom. And so it's important for us to understand this. I had a conversation, Rob, with a young man.
Antebellum.
And it was crazy because I was talking with this young man who's probably in his early 30s. Okay. Mm-hmm. I am a mature 40 plus something. I'm holding on to my last few years of 40 something. But and I had this conversation with him. We were talking, he goes, I don't really see the big issue with racism in America. And I said, I don't see what the problem is. I said, I just think people just looking backwards. He goes, so is this really a big problem? Is this really a big deal? And I had to kind of educate him. I said, the fact that you don't see the issue suggests that those forefathers of yours have been working overtime and have done a great deal to really try to level the playing field as much and as often as they possibly could. And so we continued that conversation, and there were some things he just had no clue about. Historically, he had no understanding about all of the issues that we're talking about now, how we got our voting rights, that we were seen as three-fifths human, that we were, it wasn't that long ago that they actually allowed us certain rights to vote, especially women, Black women. Mm-hmm. You look at when they were actually given the right to vote, some of the things that existed for him, he thought that they existed forever. I'm like, no, these are things that individuals like John Lewis were out there fighting and marching for. This is what Martin Luther King. And I thought about something. History has lost its, I don't want to say savor, but we have lost history. We have lost a generation, a couple of generations of young people who have no real understanding or value of or historical perspective of where we have come from as a people. And it's because we don't allow that conversation in our schools. We see that this entire concept of critical race theory teaching, talking about the issues that exist and giving real perspectives. We still have citizens or we still have school districts that are teaching that in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue and that he discovered America. How can you discover something that was never lost? Exactly. And so we still have systems that are existing that are hiding the truth, that are subverting the truth, that are straight up retelling the truth, like this issue of current American history that we're dealing with these insurrections. I almost call them patriots myself. So when I began to have that conversation, it reminded me that we really need to make sure that what our history is, the rich history that we have, that it is not forgotten, that we get it into the hearts, into the minds of these young people, so that we understand that we can never stop, we can never sleep nor slumber, because these are things that we have fought for, and we got to keep the fight going, Rob.
If not, we repeat that history.
Amen.
And we're on the way to doing it now with the Republicans trying to suppress the vote.
I'm not going back that way, bro. So they may try, but we've got to make sure that we're continually staying on top of things, and that's why we're having this conversation today. Because as I was talking with our state representative, 95th District, Amos O'Neill, yes, and Brenda Moore, our mayor, and other officials, they are understanding that this is probably the most important thing that is facing Black America in the instant moment, in this instant. There's a lot that's on the table. And I told you before, Rob, I was kind of concerned because there is this great need for us to deal and to discuss about our voting rights. There's a great need for us to end this filibuster so that we get Senator Joe Manchin, somebody get him in West Virginia. Barb, dear friend, you assured me while you were in West Virginia that you guys were getting together and you were organizing. We need to do more than just organize. Let's execute. Yes.
We need to also take care of the apathy issue, because a lot of our people, not just whites, but Black people too, have a lot of apathy with the voting situation.
Absolutely.
Voter apathy, there's no room for it, because that's the whole thing that can destroy this whole system.
Rob, explain what you, when you use the term voter apathy, explain, because there's some people that are like, I don't, what does that mean?
Generally, it means you don't care. You know, you have apathy, you're apathetic about something, you really don't care what happens with it. So the ideal is, well, they're going to get what they want anyway. I'm going to, no matter, my vote does not count. My vote does not matter. When in fact, if you study anything, get off of Facebook and study something about voting, you'll learn a whole lot about more and understand your vote. Your vote is appreciated.
Absolutely.
It's necessary.
So let's not say that you don't care, but let's say you have come to a place of apathy, meaning that you think that regardless, you're darned if you do, you're darned if you don't,
right?
And that they're going to do whatever. You care, but you think that the system is rigged against you, and so much that the system is no longer fair. And they're praying and they're hoping and counting on our community to be very apathetic,
right,
and that we give up on the system altogether. Now, let me say this, because as we begin to transition, I need you to understand why this is important. Why this conversation is so vitally important for our community to have. It's because in 2020, you all showed, in the midst of all that we were dealing with, in the midst of this healthcare crisis, in the midst of this financial crisis, in the midst of this social justice crisis,
keep going,
amen, in the midst of this mental crisis, I mean, in the midst of all that we were dealing with, in the midst of being, disconnected from the rest of the world because of our lack of internet space,
right,
we still were able to mobilize, organize, strategize, and execute our way to the polls. Now, let me tell you what this means. This means that for the first time, and we've shown, I shouldn't say this is not the first time that we have shown that the power of our vote. This is not the first time we've shown up, because
Barack Obama got
not only Barack Obama, but there's a lot of white politicians. Every year that a Democrat comes into public office, it is because the Black community has heavily voted for Democrats. This is not a new phenomenon. This is something that they have now, sometimes have taken for granted. I think that they understand what's going on now. And so it has been something that we have always done. Now, voter apathy would say, well, that's the way it used to be. It don't matter. Whoever's supposed to get in is going to get in. There's nothing we can do. And there's so many people that I've talked to, Rob, that are so apathetic at this time. And so I need you to understand this. What we showed as a community in 2020, let me tell you what happened. Joe Biden was all but washed up and chewed up and spit out like an old piece of gum. The Trump bus, the Trump train, whatever you want to call it, had targeted him and had tagged him with Sleepy Joe and brought out the situations with his son. And they were really trying to destroy him during Trump's his trial for his impeachment. They were trying to do everything that they could once they found out that he would be their leader to sully his reputation because of his son Bo and all of this other stuff. And so what happened was, when he was losing and he was not doing well, he was getting ready to lose in South Carolina as well. But Mr. Clyburn stepped up to the plate and he spoke and he said those famous words, not only does Joe know us, but we know Joe. And those words from an incumbent, a leader, one who has a great deal of respect, it challenged those blacks in South Carolina and said, you know what? This is what the leader of the village, the elder of the village is saying that we need. This is what we're doing. And they stepped in behind him wholeheartedly, and South Carolina resurrected his campaign. And if it were not for blacks, and that was the blacks in South Carolina, if it had not been for that move, that initial move, he would have been all but washed up. We saw this take place again and again. We saw Stacey Abrams, who was cheated out of a position,
in Georgia,
come back in 2020. She organized, she worked, and delivered to a Democratic president a state that has been Republican since its inception, and she did so by turning out the vote. We saw that Texas was a toe-to-toe duke out battle, all bets on the table, off the table. It was a fight to the end. They won and they edged it out, but they have never had such a competition before. Why? Because black people came out to vote. And when they saw this take place, what was the response?
Oh, it's fixed.
It's fixed. It cannot be fair. Check the ballot.
Recount.
And so, in essence, what they were saying, and I need us to listen to this because this is so vitally dangerous. What they were saying, in essence, is that we don't believe that their vote counts or their vote should count.
Yes.
And so, in that instance, that very instance, they began something called a recall. And so they recalled the initial election. They recalled Georgia. They recalled Florida. And they've been going through a system of recalls. And why are they continually finding frivolous ways to recall? Because they want to keep it in the minds of other parts of our country who don't think that we as a people should have certain rights, inalienable rights as the rest of America should. Will continually keep in mind they stole this from you, pitting Americans against Americans. Now, what they're saying, and what they're doing, and they're being very PC about it, but somebody really needs to just say what they're trying to say. Mm-hmm. These people are stealing your country. That's what January 6th was about. They were upset that we were able to take ourselves together, that we were able to see past our differences, coalesce around a particular individual. Hurting folks to the polls is only half the battle. If we don't require specific redress, our vote is all for naught. Jeff, I understand what you're saying, but that's the kind of conversation I continue to see. I think that's a short-sighted conversation. I love the way you speak. I love your concept, your thoughts. Hurting people to account. The fact it's called mobilizing. Hurting is what you do for animals, and my black people are not animals. We are powerful people who have overcome years and eons of injustice to now understand that we are a people who have power. Your vote has power. And what we see happening from January the 6th, actually from December 2020, November of last year, till now is all a part of America coming to an awakening of the real power of the black vote. Now, this is what this means. This means that we have to now find candidates, create candidates, put people in office who have our same agenda. We don't give up on the vote, but what we do is we begin to empower young people. This is why I think, and I have issues with the NAACP and some of these organizations that have been in our community for eons. We have the same people with the same voice leading the way. So now they always tell me, get involved. You got to change it from the inside. When you get on the inside of certain situations and certain institutions, you have to become a part of that institution and your voice is stifled. So what we need to do is we need to, as a community, begin to empower our young people, equip our young people for public and civic office. We need to create and create opportunities for them to learn the issues, learn the historical perspective of where we are, light a fire under them, allowing them to understand this is the power that you have and the ability to make change that exists when you become a part of the process and you come to the table with your new inventive ideas. I think it's so very important. Rob, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say it's good to give them ideas. I encourage my son all the time to get involved. I know a lot of things when I talk to him in school, but all the time we talk, I give him some new history lesson or some new lesson about, staying involved in some way, shape, or form, because he is still a black man in America and a young black man.
Okay, so everything that we're saying, the reason we're covering this is because now we're seeing this new thing about saying that the vote was fixed. So if the vote was fixed, that means it was unfair. We understand what happened was that black people came to the poll in record numbers, and they voted for a candidate that did not agree with, the principles that we have in our community. Now, and we still got to talk about Joe, and I'm gonna call him Sleepy Joe right now, even though and he's our president. I respect you, Mr. President of the United States, but you're sleeping on an issue that has a great deal of impact for communities of color. We've got to deal with this issue of the filibuster. And this is the thing that I told you that was my concern, Rob, before,
Right.
was that when it was the issue, we were like, oh, we got time to work through it. When the Republicans were in office, and I'm not voting Republican or Democrat. Certain times I vote against candidates because I don't want them to get in. That's what happened in the last election cycle. But what we have to understand is, where are our issues? We're the candidates that respect and reflect our images. We have to create those individuals. We're continually looking for other communities to create something that we need in our communities so that we can stand behind, but we're not creating those individuals, and it's our responsibility to just create those individuals. I'm gonna read what you got here. Jeff Bulls: have to aggregate further what is involved, have to be full-throated in self-advocacy. Black, you ding, 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 ding. You have hit the nail on the head. What he just said was this. He said that we've got to get to a place, and Rob, people say stuff about this. Why is it always about Black people? Because I'm a Black man, because I got a Black mama, because I come from a Black community. As Jeff would say, because my politics are Black. But what he's saying is that we've got to get out. We use the term POC, people of color,
right?
And I need you to understand that when America listens and hears people of color, their idea or their hope, they don't just include you. They include you. They include you with the Asian American. They include you and the Indian American,
Hispanic.
They include everything else until eventually you become a blurb in the pie of racial equality.
Or the melting pot.
There you go. You melt right on out of it, right? And then you come a creamy shade of tan. So we have to get into a place that we are okay setting an agenda, standing up for, speaking boldly, advocating for ADOS, that's African Descendants of Slaves. There is not another POC that exists in the United States that has had the legacy or has carried the burden as ADOS. ADOS, African Descendants of Slave, are a person of color that in this United States is responsible for building the legacy, the wealth, and the economic structures that exist, even though we have been disenfranchised from the benefits that they have and that they provide for our community. I'm going to read really quick here, Mr. Singleton. I see that you've made a number of comments out here, and so I'm going to get to one of your. There you go. I got you, Jeff. We have to make sure we still fight for everything we have and that belong to us as Black people. We truly need to understand that social media is 90% a lie, 10% half truth. Learn to read, study for yourselves. There you go. One thing we as Black people need to understand: 90% of white racist people really think as long as it's in the books or anything that we as Black people have to read, we don't want to do it. Just learn to love to read all things to help us understand everything. Yes. Mr. Edwin Singletary, seeing a great commentary that you're giving
Rob
there.
Father endorses this.
Rob, the comments that are now endorsed by Rob Father. But what I often say to young people, as I work with young minds, I say to them, he who reads leads. We've got to make sure that we get to a place, because there was this phrasing, and what Mr. Singleton was getting to is that, if you want to hide something from a Black man, what do, Rob? You put it in a book. And we've got to get to a place. Our young people do not like reading. We often don't man up to the statistic level that we should as a community in terms of our ability to read.
Literacy levels.
If you cannot read, you can't do math. I need you to understand. So reading is RIF. Remember RIF? R-I-F. Reading is fundamental. Yes, and we've got to get back to those basic structures. But let me get back to this timeline so that we can continue this conversation. I'll tell you, an hour goes by so long. December 6th, a day before the celebration or the members of Port Harbor, that's in my mind today. 13th Amendment was ratified, the first of the 3 Reconstruction amendments that we were talking about. This was the one that ended slavery within the United States and its borders. The 14th Amendment, as I said to you before, was the one that gave us a pathway to citizenship, not only for Blacks, but also for the indigenous that existed here and other migrants that were coming here to the nation. And then the 15th was the one that gave us the right to vote. All of them weren't ratified at this particular time, but December 6th, 1865, it was ratified. 13th Amendment, slavery was then considered wrong. Okay, September 28th of 1868. Okay, now pronounce this word for me because I'm going to say Opelousas. The Opelousas massacre. Rob, is that correct?
Appomattox.
No, that's a different word. The Appaloosa Massacre. It's one of the parishes in Louisiana. There was a massacre there over the course of 2 weeks. White men in this particular parish in the city of St. Landry, outside in Louisiana, killed about 250, mostly black men.
Oh, the Appalachian massacre.
Yeah, okay. And the goal was to suppress the turnout among black voters and anyone who supported reconstruction efforts. Earlier that year, Louisiana voters had ratified a state constitution that enfranchised, that brought them in black men. Now, I need you to understand that black women were given the right to vote, but black men were seen as a viable voting group in America, voting bloc. So now we are seeing that because we were given the right to vote, when we were given the right to vote and a pathway to citizenship, that right to vote stirred up a lot of people because why? Your vote has the ability to change effectively the course of how we run this country. You may not like our system of government. It is a democratic system. You may not like the Republicans and the Democrats and the independents and the far left and the far right. However, it is the system that we have. And if we're going to effectuate change, we have to use what is the power system, which is your vote in order to effectuate that change.
Right.
All right. So we got to work within the system to make this change happen. February 3rd, 1870. This is the 15th Amendment was ratified. This is the third of the three Reconstruction Amendments. The 15th Amendment, once again, was the one that prohibited states from taking away the right to vote on account of race or the color of a person or the condition of servitude. However, now this is where this is going to be very important. This is what I need you to understand. Our states were yet allowed the right to impose voter qualifications. This is where it gets really sticky in the waters. The waters get really muddy because now, even though voting has been extended to the Negro slave, the former Negro slave, we now have the federal government saying we can't discriminate because of race as it becomes a voting. However, the state now yet contains its ability to impose voter qualifications along with this process. And we will continue from that point forward to see how that type of dynamic, those laws will be the things that will eventually change the dynamics of our voting situations here in the country. And this is what we are fighting against right now. So in April 13th of 1863, we see a Colfax massacre. We're going to see a series of massacres, and I'm only naming some of these, Rob. And all of these massacres have to do because there were a group of individuals that were so afraid of black people given the right to vote. A mob of about 150 armed white men in Colfax, the seat of Grant Parish in Louisiana, killed between 60 and 150 black Americans who had taken over the local courthouse and been defending it from possible Democratic seizure following the state's controversial 1872 gubernatorial election. The massacre showed the lengths to which some of the opponents of Reconstruction would go to regain their accustomed authority. I need you to understand there are so many people. What we're seeing happen on the steps here in the state of Michigan, when the militia showed up with the guns and then went to our governor's house, what we see taking place around the world in different places. What was the name of the town where the young lady was killed by the white supremacist protesters, and the number 45 said that there were good people on both sides of the ticket.
Oh, down in Virginia.
Yeah, so when we look at Charlottetown, when we, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's correct, but I can't.
Charlottesville is where the dude Brown was killed.
Okay, so remind me of what that is, but we're not going to get into this discussion. What I'm saying is we're seeing all of these attacks because you are given the right to vote, and there are people that understand that when you were given the right to vote, you were given a power that is transformative and has the ability to change everything around you. So they want to retain or regain their accustomed authority. This is why number 45 came up with that theme. Let's make America great again. It was a cold word. It was heavily loaded with racial tension. It was heavily loaded to take us back to a time when blacks were not included in the voting process. So we wouldn't have to worry about having to deal with how many blacks show up in Texas or Georgia to come up to vote. That may change our perspective or the situations that we're trying to put in place. All right. So the reign of Jim Crow. Everyone, hopefully you have heard about Jim Crow. Around the turn of the 20th century, Southern lawmakers, aware of the fact that they couldn't explicitly disenfranchise black voters, they began to impose an elaborate mix of registration requirements, poll taxes, literacy tests, understanding that clauses is designed to underpin a new racial regime. So since they no longer could stop you from voting, they would do everything that they could in creating obstacles to your voting process. Powerful information. Patrice Russell, thank you for being a part of this. So since they could not stop you from voting, what they would do is they would create other elements that were called voter suppression laws or voter suppression ideas that were then implemented to keep you from the voting booth. I want you to understand, black man, black woman, black child, since you were given the right to vote, you have become you were already a threat.
I was going to say that threat.
You're already a threat. I mean, your prowess, your existence, you are excellent in everything that you've been able to do. You see where we have been able to be suppressed for hundreds of years, and yet we have such a resilient nature about us that we are able to come back even from the ashes like the phoenix. We will rise. I continually tell you, when I think about the poem that Maya Angelou wrote about "and still like dust we rise," it reminds me of us as a people. And the moment that you were given the right to vote, you were a threat to be reckoned with. So August 12th of 1890. Now, we're currently in some 1890s and things, but we're going to get to some current dates here. August of 1890, Mississippi Constitutional Convention begins. Y'all got to listen to this. I cannot make this stuff up. Delegates convened to rewrite Mississippi's Constitution. Because you were given the right to vote, they're trying to rewrite the Constitution to skirt the 15th Amendment and functionally disenfranchise black voters. Adopted on November 1st, the Constitution achieved the delegates' chief aim through instituting mechanisms including poll taxes and literacy tests. One of the state's constitution framers, who was Democrat James K. Vanderman, who would go on to become governor and a U.S. senator, saw no need to hide his disdain for black Americans. This is what he says now, and I quote, all right, Mississippi's Constitutional Convention of 1890 was held for no other purpose than to eliminate the N word, and I'm not talking about now and here, Nigger, from politics, he said. In time, other states across the South took a cue from Mississippi. This is why we're hearing so many people who understand history and how history is operated are saying that what we're dealing with these new voter suppression laws, they're referring to them as the new Jim Crow. Because what happened in Mississippi, then they say, hey, if we can do that in Mississippi, guess what? We can do it in Texas. If we can do it in Texas, we can do it in Missouri. We can do it in Missouri, then we can do it in Florida. And they began this systematic process by which they were using these taxes and these reading tests and all of these other things, because they couldn't stop you from voting, but they could make it harder. And hopefully you would become, what's the word? Apathetic. That you would say, you know what, they're not going to let us do it. We might as well give up and just stop and no longer go to the polls. This is why we as a community, black folks, we cannot grow apathetic. It has been the process and the mechanism by which they have tried to keep us from the polls. It has been the thing that they have tried to use to beat us down and to take away our spirit. But there are so many people who said that they would not give up the fight because they recognize the power of the vote. All right. I only got a few minutes here, but I'm going to get to this. July 2nd, 1964. And I hope you guys are enjoying this information. Hopefully you're being empowered with this information, and hopefully it will change the conversation and the narratives in the village. We got to start talking about this stuff right now. Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964 into law. Now, I need y'all to understand something. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 now becomes a law. The law prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin. Later was expanded to protect against discrimination based upon sexual orientation and gender. Every great movement in the world has hijacked what we as African descendants of slaves, Black people, have started. So when we talk about how we have begun to get these freedoms, everyone else is coming in and they've hijacked it. That's why, and you live what you want to live, do what you want to do, be how you want to be, okay? Because this is a free country. You can do anything that you want. But that's why when we use the power of our systems, we've got to be aware. So like in 2020, when the whole Me Too movement came along, we need to understand what these movements are and what they stand for, because many of the ways in which we've been able to effectuate change and get some of the systems in place that we have been hijacked, and other agendas, not the Black agenda. As Jeffrey Bull said on here, we got to be willing to say African descendants of slaves. We got to be willing to say that we're standing up for the right for Black men and women, for Black children, and be okay with that. It's time for us as a people. We are so loving, so caring, so open-minded. You can come to the cookout. We've got to start now setting some standards. I'll allow you to the cookout when your agenda becomes my agenda. When you understand what's important to my community, then you can come to the cookout. If you're not doing, don't come take a picture. We don't want you kissing our babies. We're not, don't invite us. Don't come speak at our churches. Shut it down until we begin to understand that you're going to speak to the needs of Black people. All right. I feel like I'm running for political office right now. All right, 4 minutes. All right, March 7th, 1965. We all know this as Bloody Sunday. About 600 activists set out in Alabama to march from Selma to Montgomery to protest for Black voting rights. When the marchers reached the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, they were encountered by white state troopers who attacked them with billy clubs and tear gas. The event became known as Bloody Sunday. I went down on my knees. My legs went out from under me. I thought I was going to die. The late civil rights leader, John Lewis, told us on CNN in 2015. And we've seen these images over and over again. Why do you think this took place? It took place because someone does not want you to have the right to vote. All right, July 27, 2006. Notice the changing in dates. Most recent extension. There was an extension to the Voting Rights Act. Republican President George W. Bush signed legislation extending the Voting Rights Act for additional 25 years, saying that the right of the ordinary men and women to determine their own political future lies at the heart of the American experiment. Now, this is what I don't understand. I'm tired of having my citizenship extended. I'm tired of having my ability or my right to access to vote and my right to citizenship extended. These need to be amendments to the Constitution or things that are changed and become law, so we no longer have the right. I don't want nobody to be able to write and take away, to vote and take away my rights. Let's change some things. These need to become ingrained as an additional portion of the Constitution or whatever it is, that we no longer have to vote on these things. June 25th, 2013, the court decided in Shelby County versus Holder, a 5-4 decision defines that the Voting Rights Act by freeing jurisdictions with histories of racial discrimination and voting from having to gain federal approval. That's called pre-clearance. So what they did is they said, you know what, you can do what you want to at the federal level. We're going to create these issues called pre-clearance. And so once again, these are areas and ways that they continue upticks against keeping Blacks from the voting poll. All right, we are now at the conclusion of this. Hopefully you're getting an understanding of what I'm saying. We've got to have this conversation with the village. It is all about our rights to vote. It is all about our ability to stand up and to say what we desire, and then to create candidates and stand behind those candidates who carry our ideas and our agendas to our places of civic restitution where they can begin to vote and empower our community with that vote. I want to thank you all for tuning in on today. I love you. Take care of yourselves and each other. Tune in next week with more of Straight Talk with Kareem Bowen. God bless you all. Grace and peace.
With Kareem Bowen on KISS 107.1.